Hi, everyone. There's one more minute, so you can relax one more minute. I wanted to say hi to the people on Zoom. And thank you for being here. If you're here, hi. I know that there will be a few people probably coming in a little late because classes end at 2:15, so we may have a few people. So just so you know, there may be a big crowd joining us.
We'll make room for them.
Or not. So I guess it's 2:00, so I'm gonna start first without the book or anything, because I have a few images, but just to introduce myself, I'm Liana Andreasen. And I have just published this book, which is a short story collection. And it's very dear to me because it's kind of they're the stories I consider my best. I've been writing for a while. Actually, if you want to know, my first novel was published. It wasn't published. It was it's in my drawer. It's published in my drawer in my hometown. I called it a novel. I was in 4th grade, and it had 14 characters, 7 girls, 7 boys. They're all orphans, because at that time, I guess Shirley Temple movies and Orphan Annie and all these movies were popular. And so these 14 kids had horses and swords. So they had adventures. It should still be published probably. I'll dig it out. Anyway, so that was my idea of starting to write. But off and on, I wrote stories. And there was a time when I was writing poetry, and I have a novel in the works now that contains some real stories and some made up. And this is one thing I can say about my story collection. Is people like to ask writers, are stories real in your book? How much of it is real? How much is made up? I'm going to say that most of it is made up and most of it is real in a way. So I like to combine real experiences with metaphors, symbolism, and so I kind of hide reality behind characters, behind different ways to change it to stylize reality. So this book has 18 stories. It looks a little thin, but they're in there, the 18 of them. And some of them are 2 of them, I'll just say now, 2 are almost word for word taken from real events, from reality. And there are a few that I wrote based on some dreams I had, which I'll give an example of each type. And what to me, dreams are fascinating because I don't know how much you dream and remember your dreams, all of your dreams, but if you may not remember a lot of them, but to me, the ones that stand out are the ones that seem to be some kind of metaphoric interpretation of reality, because I mean, that's what our unconscious mind does. It creates a little short story. So, I mean, it's kind of baked into the nature of dreaming, that it's a filtration of reality into symbols and metaphors. So I like to sometimes take those dreams and turn them into a story because I know that there's a meaning, and I'm trying to understand the meaning of the dream as I'm creating the story. And because I like Gabriel Garcia Marquez a lot, I also try to use magical realism sometimes because I don't like to have only realistic stories. Because I think magical realism, surreal stories, like the ones that come from dreams, they offer a mirror to reality. So it's a fun way to look at things. Well, I'm not going to say fun because sometimes it's very dark realities that are filtered through magical realism. So I have a variety of stories, and even some science fiction. If you're into science fiction, I have at least 2 that are just plain science fiction. So what I did with these stories, all of them through the years, so they've been produced, I wrote them at different times in my life. And all of them have been published in journals previously. So I was just writing, publishing, then sending out to journals, and some of them started to see the light of day in journals. I was part of a writers group, so I produced more writing through that writers group. I don't have an MFA, but to me, you know, you don't have to necessarily get a degree that says you're a writer. For me, it's, you know, get experience as a write, and then start trying to publish. So after I got all these published, then I decided, okay, I'm gonna put them in a collection and try to find a publisher. And it was a process too, to find a publisher. So I'm very happy. This is kind of a distillation of a lot of my different interests over several years. And I will say one more thing about how I came to write these stories. Over 10 years ago, I was going through chemo, and I'm alive, so it's over, it's in the past. So, but at that time, I wanted to feel part of the world. You know, everybody's afraid of death. So in order to not be afraid, I wanted to be anchored in reality. I got into this writers group called Lit Reactor, which was kind of led by, kind of from the shadows, by Chuck Palahniuk, who is the writer of the Fight Club, if you're familiar with that. But the writers there, and I took 3 workshops, 3 classes with different writers there, and we had contests and things like that. But anyway, the writers there were more edgy, and Palahniuk is known for being edgy. So I became a little more edgy. Yay. So some of my stories are not like happy rainbows and butterflies. Do I have butterflies? Birds, I do. There are some birds. But some of the stories are darker. None of the stories are about chemo or anything like that. It's just that was how I felt that I was part of the world still while I was going through a difficult time. So some of the stories were keeping me connected to the world. And of course, I continued writing after that. So that's my kind of a little background information for the stories. Now, I used AI to create a few images for some of the stories that I'm reading from today, because I thought some people are visual. And also I was trying to imagine how would they be portrayed. So I'm gonna put some images on the screen. I basically have just 5, but I will, I'll put one and then read from the story that is connected to. So I'm gonna start with, okay, let me put the image on. And then I'm just gonna click next. Okay. It's a building. Okay, but this is a story. I mean, it's connected to a story that takes place in a theater, and it's my story, probably the only story that is directly connected to my background as a Romanian who grew up under communism. So I forgot to say this from the beginning. Some of you are my students and you know, but I am from Romania, so I grew up under totalitarian society. And this particular story that I'm going to read from that is called Puppet Show, it has a lot of, the characters are all taken from reality. So the main character, who's a puppeteer or a puppet master, and the actress who plays the role of the princess, they're based on real people. The puppeteer character is inspired by a friend of mine. Well, he was a very troubled individual, and he actually drank himself to death at 35. So not a very happy story. He was kind of a tragic figure, and he wanted to be a director and things like that. But other people in the story are based on some people I used to know. And And the way I use this story is I made it into a metaphor for totalitarian society and how people are manipulated, how people's good intentions are misused and turned against them. So in this story called The Puppet Show, this actress, Gina, is kind of made to play, that's her job, but the puppeteer is asking her to play with puppets. So she's the only live person in every show, and she has to improvise. And also he hires a man, usually an attractive young man, to play with her on the stage and the puppets. So what he does is he manipulates her to fall in love with each person that he hires. And then when she gets into, she starts dating this person, something happens in the play, the character dies, and then the guy dies in reality. So then it starts messing with her mind, as you can imagine, until finally the last actor refuses to go on stage when he knows it's his time to die. So then this kind of reflects the revolution that we had in Romania and how the regime fell when the puppets refused to dance for the puppet master. So anyway, that's the story. I promise I won't make such a long story about each of the stories I'm reading from. But this was the theater that inspired the story. It's in my hometown. In my hometown, it's called Iași. It's in Romania. Okay. The next image is my representation of that play where the princess always has to play with these puppets that do different things. She doesn't know what they're gonna do, so she has to kind of react to them and improvise, basically. And she's not really allowed to speak, so she has to just respond at the end with one word to the play of the puppets. So I just created a little image to represent that. So this is one of the plays, one of the shows that they're kids from town who are coming to see. And this is during the totalitarian time period. Many people are starving, so kids there go to see amazing, imaginative things that make them forget their harsh reality. So this is how one of the shows goes. Gina, the white princess, eats peaches. She makes believe that giant peaches are real, even if their color is bright plastic orange. Hungry, the children imagine the taste as they roll their tongues in their mouth. Gina is not sad anymore. Her song is spring-like outside. Her white dress sparkles with the promise of a happy story, even if she is enclosed in a giant bird cage. She eats peaches with hope. She sings of the land that was frozen by a North Pole sorcerer. Outside her cage, little rabbits and ducks are trapped in ice. She summons warm rains to fight the ice. When her song ends, clouds begin to dance in front of her. It rains and the rabbits jump out from the ice, the ducks fly. They free her from the cage and the curtain falls. In 10 seconds, the curtain lifts again. The children listen to her song, waiting for Radu. For the last few weeks, he had been carrying her in his arms and has been giving her fist-sized rubies and diamonds. Now the children are whispering his name, surrounded by flying marionettes, slashing the heads of rubber dragons. He moves valiantly toward the princess and her rabbits. She's sitting by a big tree. He sees her and his face is round and laughing. His eyes are blue in the spotlight. She waves to him, but she cannot talk anymore. He stops. She stands up and lifts her arms. There's a flash of lightning. He looks up. The tree bursts in flames and falls upon him. The princess screams and rushes forward, but the flames have vanished. So has Radu. The children gasp. She has to give them one word now, but she's crying again. They're so close that they can see the tears fall on the dusty wooden floor. Defeat, she says, and runs off the stage. And this is the second time that somebody dies in the play. So Nasha's afraid, is he gonna die in reality? She became very afraid that day. She tried to talk to the puppeteer after the show, but he was drunk again and he was asking for money. She pleaded with him. Is something going to happen? You have to stop it, she said. He stumbled in front of her and it seemed as if his thoughts also stumbled in the dust of his mind. You love him, he chanted in his drunkenness. L'amour toujours, he sang. Mate left that week to visit his parents in the country. That was the actor who was playing Radu. The weather was capricious and there were powerful storms in May. Lightning hit a big tree just as he was trying to load wood into a cart somewhere remote outside the village. He died instantly. Gina refused to work for a month. The puppeteer crawled on his knees at her door, but she would not let him in. And now I'm gonna skip to the moment when the last actor who plays refuses to go on the stage. So I must be placed. So she feared the show the following night, so sometime later, there's a new Radu in the show. She did not want to go. She put on her boots of fake leather and her coat of fake fur, and she let her feet take her through the streets. So now the show. Her voice is shaking as she tells her first story. The children do not know this. They're hungry, and they look at the long table filled with plastic food. Her fingers shake as she pretends to eat a fat turkey leg that looks more like the leg of an ostrich. Her hands and legs are in chains. She stares blankly as the curtain falls and she counts to 10. She is still in chains as she begins the second song, the second story. The children cannot hear her and ask each other what she said. Radu, Radu, they shout, for who else can free her? Or who else would share in the plastic feast? Behind the curtain, the puppeteer watches and Lorian watches him watch. Go on stage, whispers the puppeteer, now. I quit. You what? I'm leaving. Lorian turns in the dark and walks away. The puppeteer is furious and the children can hear his drunken curses. The puppeteer throws a cloak on and rushes on stage. No one can see his face. He pulls the chains away from the princess, cursing her. Gina, the princess, is frozen. She cannot move. He slaps her. The word, give them the word, he whispers through the cloak. The word, the children shout. She stands up. Death, she says loud and clear. She pushes him and runs off the stage. Blood flowed in the street that week. The whole country boiled with the anger of many years. That week, a dictator was stunned that people stopped following orders. Even the secret police did not help him. Like puppets with their strings hanging loose, they were just waiting to see where the dice would fall. The dictator was run off his place and the palace crumbled. So basically, it ends with the change of the regime and symbolically the crumbling of the show that this puppeteer had put in place. So I'm going to move on to another story. Sorry, this was done with the help of AI and also my very poor skills in putting together pictures, fake pictures. But anyway, I just wanted a representation of something. I told you that some of my stories come from dreams, and this is probably one of my, I don't want to say favorite because it's not necessarily an uplifting story, but there's some darkness in it. I did have a dream about a horse, a white horse that was dying in a very dilapidated area of a town, and the owner of the horse at some point lifted the horse and threw him in the valley, and something clicked with that dream. I'm like, what can the symbolism of that horse be? So I created the story and I called it Valley of the Horse. And one of the characters is the owner of the horse, and it's kind of, he doesn't want to put the horse to sleep, so he wants it to die in a natural environment. And the other guy kind of comes every day to check on them on his way back from work, because he discovers them there and is just intrigued by why is there a white horse and a man. So they start talking and learn about each other. And basically what he's trying to, the person who's just a witness to the suffering of the horse and wondering why this guy is keeping her alive. And the connections that he starts making are to the death of his former girlfriend, where he has some guilt in it, and it becomes a story about guilt and pain. That's the connection he makes to why he finds this intriguing. So I'm gonna read from a scene toward the end of the story. So he goes for several days to see this scene, and it kind of leads to a more dramatic event. So he goes there, and right when he arrives, I think it's the 7th day, he arrives at the scene, and the guy, the owner of the horse, is not there. So the mare was awake. He looked around, suddenly timid. She was not in much pain, or else she had grown accustomed to her terrors. Rotting leaves made a thick bed for a dying mare. The body was diminished. She had probably long forgotten how to be hungry. And yet he saw something there, strength he could not understand. Powerless and forgotten, this horse seemed grateful for the breaths it could still take. This horse, he thought. There was recognition between them. She took his presence for what it was, and her eyes told him that she wanted to be in the world, alive. Overwhelmed with her shameless beauty, he reached down and touched the white face, feeling the obstinate bones to which life still clung. He caressed the long ear, hoping to transfer some warmth through it. For reasons he could not possibly think of, he saw the mare pull her weight off the ground, struggling to lift her front legs. Her hooves dug in the slippery leaves, nose pointing up, snorting and gulping the air. Dumbfounded, he stepped back, allowing her the dignity and her will to live. She was standing, looking at him with questioning eyes. It was over as soon as he had started. Her legs remembered their weakness, and she kneeled down without hurry. She let her body rest on her side again, still watching him. Ivy approached. That was the owner. "What did you do to her?" His voice was rough as his words. "You mean what she just did? I saw you. Just be gone already." But maybe she can still be tried, but Ivy's eyes were nothing but hate. Zach retreated. Then, this was the 6th day, sorry, the 7th day, he comes back and he finds a different scene there. The horse was there and the 2 men, so the owner has a friend who's a doctor, and he's kind of numbed the pain of the horse. Everything was in place for his arrival, but something terrible was in the air. The man watched him with colorless eyes. Then he knew what had driven him there that morning, and why everybody waited. Long ago, he had seen April draw her last breath. Now he recognized the mystery of life on the verge of leaving the body. A mute emptiness filled him. And yet he did not expect the horse's legs to be missing. "What have you done?" he whispered, staring at the small leaves that floated in puddles of blood. Ivy's shapeless eyes were moist with tears. "Don't worry," Ivy said. She didn't feel a thing. Pete, the doctor, is good with that. "You made him do that? And you," he turned to the surgeon, "you listen to this lunatic? You're out of your minds." He knew it was coming, something deep, something from deep within. Suddenly, he saw himself from above, mutilated, with stumps where his legs had been. It was his own body he had come to watch, whose life was slowly dripping away. He knew why. It had been his body that had strayed away from April, doomed her to unbearable pain. Even now, he could not tell why he had more power over her in his betrayal than in his love, or why somebody's body could have that power over another's mind. So basically, he makes this connection between the horse and himself when he betrayed his girlfriend, and he feels guilty. He thinks she died because of him. And finally, this is the final scene. Judge Ivy was sobbing, caressing the fallen body. "It's all because of you, Zach," he shouted suddenly, lifting unrecognizable eyes at him. "Why couldn't you just leave us alone?" Zach shivered. He could feel the miracle approaching. The morning grew still. Grunting madly, Ivy bent with sudden resolve his final wild judgment. He lifted the body of the horse above his head and threw it into the valley below. It rolled and rolled, away from the buildings, away from the men who did not understand. Just another useless, painful miracle of the city. And just as a conclusion, after this whole scene ends, a few weeks later, Zach and Ivy come to this valley together to see what's left. And looking down, he felt compelled to utter, so it's just an empty valley now. Looking down, he felt compelled to utter one question, although the answer stared at him silently from the valley of the dead horse, the same answer that pumped blood into his veins. He wanted to hear himself say it. It was as simple as that. Is it possible to live without joy? And as an answer to this question, a nun appears at the bottom of the valley, kind of cleaning up the place. The two men lingered a while in silence. Below, the modest collector of souls busied herself by the dome in the cold, lonely morning. Their presence meant nothing to her. She was just eager to wash clean the bottom of the bottomless city. So this is one of the more weird stories that I wrote because it's so filled with symbolism, and probably some of the interpretation is up to the reader. I haven't completely made sense of it because, as I said, it was my attempt to interpret my dream. And now I'm going to another story. Okay. This is a story that is much more realistic. Very little symbolism in that one. And the scene made with AI, sorry. It was just fun to try to imagine some of the parts of the stories. But in this story, the reason why I wrote the story is that I realized how much people like to create a persona in this day and age when a lot of people meet online. Sometimes people meet their significant others online. And so how much, when you meet a person online, how much is that person real, or how much is it a made up persona? So a lot of us kind of enhance the person we are to be more interesting for people who don't know us, right? So it's something that everybody's probably worried about when they meet somebody they don't know in person. Are they real? Is this the real person, or are they making up an image for me to try to appeal to me? So there's a couple in this story. There's a man character who thinking that he will be more interesting to this girl that he likes, that he met online, he pretends to be a veteran. He pretends he was in Iraq. So he thinks that it gives him a little bit of an interesting factor, like make him more edgy, more appealing. But then when they actually start dating in real life, the lie becomes problematic because she keeps wanting him to tell her stories about Iraq. And he has to look them up online and make up more stuff. and more the lie grows. So the question is, how much of our persona that we show others is made up to give them what they expect? And at what point do we become a real self when we try to actually connect to somebody? So it's a story of relationships, connections, lies. And to what point can you push a lie? So this character finds out kind of that he maybe shouldn't have lied, but the girl has a son from another person. So she's a single mom raising this child alone. And the guy moves in with them and he tries to bond with the son, to be like a father figure to him. So this scene is him talking to the son. I hope you forgive me, I will drop an F-bomb, but it's fine. Sorry, it's where the story took me. These are characters, so if they want to say it, I'll let them say it. He moved in. That was when Ted, the boy, finally met him. She never brought Kevin home when the boy was there. She had first wanted to see that he wasn't one of those guys who ended up getting dragged away by the police, drooling and cooked out. I only drink beer, he had said. He didn't bring much except some clothes with their hangers and a grimy shaving kit. She bought a few things for him. They went to Walmart together. Well, get through all of it, she said. It makes me so angry you can't get a therapist without insurance. I swear I'll go to community college to be a psychiatric nurse. I'm too old for medical school, but that way I'll treat both of us. Waitress is not a goddamn career. The boy Ted was reluctant at first. He said to Kevin, "You're worse than my dad." From an 8-year-old, that hurt a little. In their bedroom, Martha explained to what the kid had meant. When he wasn't at some bar, his dad would just sit around the house and watch TV. He would spit on the floor and yell at the kid to bring him beer. Kevin asked Dad to watch TV with him, and the boy didn't want to. He'd just stand in the door and stare. Then the boy cursed and kicked when Martha tried to take him to his room, and she cried. Kevin took Ted to his room and closed the door to talk to him, man to man. "My mom thinks you're some war hero, but my mom is fucking stupid," Ted told him. The skin on his face was strangely dusty and sharp, as if he was 30, not 8. What is it with the war thing?" said Kevin. "Your mom is not stupid, and I don't want to hear those words from you again. You gotta learn to get along, Ted. How's this? You'll be my hero if you're nice to your mom. Nobody likes her. She's a bitch," the boy said. "You don't like your mom either?" The boy was quiet. "Do you know how lucky you are to have her?" Kevin said. "Lucky my ass," said the boy. And Kevin raised a hand as if to slap him. "I'm not afraid of you. My mom's boyfriends beat her. You're not so tough. What makes you so tough?" "Ted, I promised your mom you and I can be friends. I will never hit your mom or you. That's what a tough guy does, buddy. He only hits a man who jumps at him. You understand?" "What makes you a hero?" the boy said. "I think you're full of shit." Kevin stared. "Okay, I saved a couple of my buddies once, Ted. That's one thing your mom is talking about." "Like how? Tell me." "You two with the stories, come on." He had no choice. He told the boy that one time a car blew up in front of him on a bridge and he had to dive into a river. It was a very dirty river because that was the only kind of river in Iraq. He saved 2 wounded soldiers and another 2 were dead already. He didn't want a medal. He heard Martha crying behind the door, and he came out and asked her why. She said it wasn't sadness. She started laughing while she cried. "I can't remember the last time a man sat down with Ted to tell him a story," she said. So this still escalates to the point that he can't take it anymore because he starts to hate himself for the lies that he's been telling both the mom and the child. So he decides that he wants to go to the lake, and there he's going to tell her he wants to break up This is just gonna have a little trip with them to a lake, and the kid wants to take his neighbor's dog that he sometimes dog sits for. And so they all go to the lake, and at some point the dog jumps in the water, and the boy thinks the dog is drowning. So he jumps in the water, but he doesn't know how to swim. Because, well, I'll read from that point. So Kevin was sitting with his back against a tree, telling Martha she was too good for him. She was crying silently. That one was he saw the dog jump into the lake from the corner of his eye. That would have been a trivial observation had it not been for the boy's cry. Mom, Spock is drowning. I'll save him like Kevin did. The boy made a big splash with his clothes on, and Kevin knew that the boy did not swim. Martha's piercing cry happened at the same time as Kevin jumped to his feet. They both watched for only a second how the boy came up, a fluttering shoulder and a head, a swollen jacket twisting with splashes, sinking again. The dog was already back on shore. They both ran. With every step Kevin took toward the lake, one thought punctuated his foot hitting the ground. She would not, she could not, she must not forgive him. If the boy died, he had to tell her to kill him too. How had she not seen the whole time that he was just a crook and a loser who hadn't returned from Iraq but from a stint in jail? As Martha embraced the child, crying, Kevin kneeled next to them and reached to touch her shoulder. Martha, you have to stop believing all my lies. Both Ted and Martha looked up at him, the boy still coughing out mud. If this is going to work, you have to stop asking me to lie. It's all lies, Martha, all of it. Martha stood up. She looked down at him and down at her child. I know, she said, I know. I see in the story. That's just an image of him jumping to save the kid. The boy didn't die. Yay.
Nor did the dog.
Okay, and this story I keep losing the arrow. There's the name there. Okay. This was me. So this is one of the more real, actually, I told you that there are a couple of stories that are completely taken from reality. So basically, nothing in the story is made up. I didn't write it exactly when it was happening. So what happened, I was around 27, I think, when I was a grad student in Binghamton, New York. And I took a summer job at a stable because I was really obsessed with horses, if you haven't figured that out, since I dream of horses. Anyway, yeah, I wanted to have experience with not just riding, but how to take care of them and things like that. So I saw this opportunity. I didn't have a car, so this person was a guy called Dan who had a stable with 22 horses somewhere in the hills of around Binghamton, New York. Very hilly there. So he needed help taking care of those horses. He lived there by himself. His wife had left him. I found out all these details later because I didn't know him from a rock in the ground. So I said, I was going there to ride maybe once a month or something with a family who was taking me because I didn't have a car. And one time the guy just asked me, hey, you're an international student, right? Would you like to work at the stable? I won't pay you, but if it'd be food and board and also tips from people when you get to be a trail guide. I didn't know enough about horses to be a trail guide, but I said, yeah, sure. And I thought, yeah, okay, I'll do that. When the time came to go to his farm, I realized this guy he looked like Clint Eastwood, kind of cowboy, scruffy, about 60-year-old. I was 27. And he lived in the middle of nowhere. I had no car. He just took me there and I stayed at his house for a month. So when I arrived there the first day, I was like, what am I doing here? I'm here with a man who, you know, if he rapes me, kills me, nobody's around. The first house is 2 miles away. But as I say in the story, from the next day, so the first night I slept with, like, I had nightmares. This coming downstairs, his room was upstairs. And I realized that he needed a helping hand much more than he needed a woman. So he would not, I realized that he's not gonna, make a pass at me or anything because he was desperate to have somebody help him at the stable. So I shoveled manure, I did all these farm things. I didn't know much about it. I learned to drive a tractor and all that. I didn't drive a car at the time, but that was my first driving experience, driving a tractor to cut the grass on a field. It was pretty wild. I got thrown off horses many times, including from Tyler, off of Tyler, because he was a little small, but he was very spunky and fast. So until I became a trail guide. And I asked him, I was very nervous taking people out on the trail, but I said, what could happen if I go on the trail? And it's like, anything. Okay, very reassuring. So this guy also was growing pot and marijuana plants in the woods. Yeah, I didn't know much about any of that. I was kind of, among my tasks, I was helping him water them. That was a long time ago. And this is fiction, sorry. I already told you it's not fiction. But I'm gonna read a part. So the way the story is told is kind of with flashbacks. So it starts at a pig roast. So the pig roast is how he was trying to save his business, his horse business. He was kind of going bankrupt. And he said if he goes bankrupt, the horses are gonna get sold to become dog food. So he didn't want that to happen. He said if the cops come to take his business or to take the horses, he's gonna wait with the gun at the window. He's gonna go down in flames. He had about 30 guns in his house that I counted on the ground floor, because he probably had more in his bedroom too, upstairs. Anyway, so this kind of a rough guy. The house was a mess. That's the barn over there where the horses were. But that was my most adventurous month, I think, in the United States when I was a student. So very memorable experience. But the story is told, it starts at the pig roast, where he has this Cadillac that he's trying to he created a raffle to try to make money for the horse business. So the raffle was, people bought tickets, they were supposed to win the Cadillac. They would come at the pig roast, eat and be merry, and then he would draw a name from a hat and somebody would win the Cadillac. Well, it didn't go as planned because he was never gonna get a person to win the Cadillac to begin with. So he made me write fake names on the tickets. And everybody knew who came to the pig roast. Some of them were my friends. They knew that they weren't gonna win it, that he was just trying to raise money, and the raffle was kind of fake. But anyway, in the meantime, I tell kind of stories of how I got there. It's kind of from by association or stream of consciousness, goes back and forth in time until it gets back to the pig roast. So that's the story called Warner's Caddy, which is the last story in the book. So I'm gonna go to a moment where the marijuana. Okay. I helped him carry the buckets of water through the woods, and we had to bend before getting to the trees because bushes were too low and drivers on the road would see us and figure out what we were doing, because people just know what buckets with water are needed for when you go into the woods. Well, of course, most farmers grow marijuana, he said, but for him, he said it's a necessity. It's just a little bit of extra income to keep the horses from going to the dog food factory. He's planning something bigger than this, like renting one of those fields for an amusement park, but until then, he'll just grow and sell marijuana. That's how in my mind, the watering of plants became a sacred ritual, something as pure as the sight of horses on the field early in the morning, eating hay and running through the mist that lifts and joins the big swirls gathering about the treetops. Pure like the mist between those two hills that he showed me on the first day at 5:30 in the morning when we took the wheelbarrow to the path in the woods to dump the crop and fill the holes made by rain so the horses wouldn't trip. The secret place with the marijuana plants was hard to reach because he left the thorny, spidery bushes around them on purpose so no one would find them. The palm plants smelled and looked like Christmas trees, and I felt as if we were going to pick one for the house. We're such a team, he said. We're like a married couple, except for the sex. I always laugh to myself hearing that because I still have no idea how I managed to dodge his advances living in his house as I do, with the first neighbors half a mile away from down the hill. Haifa, my Syrian roommate, nearly fainted when he came to pick me up at the apartment, his grumpy, skinny self, eyes of steel and jeans that seemed to have survived his very return from Vietnam. The marijuana plants were gone before the Cadillac raffle and the pig roast. A few days ago, he left me driving the tractor in the field where he gave me riding lessons and went to check on the plants. When he came back, I could not even tell him proudly that I had hit a rock while cutting the grass and the big screw was busted, so I replaced it, just as he'd shown me. Me, mechanically challenged without a driver's license. I could not tell him because his face was grimmer than that day when he thought Dusty, his Arabian horse, was dying, and we had to walk the horse for 6 hours to get his cramps to cease. The neighbor stole my marijuana plants, he said, and his eyes of blue steel, the same eyes that scares the neighbor's children under the table when he stopped by, were not even looking at me. How do you know it was your neighbor? He's been eyeing the plants, I've seen him. He stole them while we were out on the 2-hour ride. Stole 2 out of the 3 patches, cut all the plants clean off the ground. So go get it back. He wouldn't admit it. He won't admit he did it. I can't call the police on him, can I? He said, and something earthy, something defeated but not done was in his voice. He did not even sound like a man whose only extra source of income was gone, and he was closer to bankruptcy than ever. He sounded just like that, like life. Things come, things go. That's when he put a gun in my hand, and I wasn't sure if it had come from downstairs from my room, maybe, or from upstairs where perhaps he kept the loaded ones. I told him I didn't want to take the gun. Do what with it? Go saddle Tyler. We're going to start on the 2-hour path, so he'll think we're going for 2 hours. Then we cut through the woods on the path I know, and we catch him in the act. He'll try to get the 3rd patch for sure. And if he sees us with guns, who do you think is shooting first? I'll be like a clown carrying a gun, saying, please shoot me. Nah, he won't try. If he does, I'll take him down. That's Dan. I talked him out of giving me the gun. He decided I shouldn't hold it because I didn't have a permit. But I didn't talk him out of riding our horses to sneak up on his neighbor, the thief. I knew it wouldn't turn out as well as a Clint Eastwood movie, or at least not for me. Were we to find the man cutting the marijuana plants? If this neighbor had the crazy eye like Dan, I'd be toast anyway, carrying a gun or not. Yes, I had met some of his neighbors, including one cop who smoked pot with Dan and the others. And when they tried to pass it to me, I said, no, and Dan had to reassure them, just go. The neighbor was not there. Instead, Dan cut the plants down himself and we carried them into the house, all 10 of them. That night, my hands were sticky and green from separating buds from leaves and stems with scissors. My hands smelled wonderful. That's how Dan talks me into things. So I'm writing the names. We compromised to 250 of them. Thankfully, I don't have to think of too many variations. As he says, he'll only draw once, so I can write one single name 100 times or more. I choose the name of this cool poet from Maryland, the professor who writes about life in charming ways, mixing the metaphors and wonderful images of trees and goldenrod flowers. I write Michael Warner, Michael Warner, Michael Warner. He watches me from behind those glasses that look misplaced on the face of a cowboy. Even in the house, he never parts with his gray hat, and he wants me to keep mine on, too. He gave it to me the first day here because I'd be in the sun all day. It belonged to Jerry, who left him 3 years ago, and she was about the same size as me. My hat is great too, except mine is limp and deformed, and it didn't get in shape even when we tried to steam it at the stove, boiling a pot of water. His hat is sturdy, good quality. For all I know, that hat survived Vietnam too. Maybe that secret mission where he killed people at close range with a knife. It's sticky, he says. Blood gets all over you. So he says, and I've learned that I'll never be able to tell between his true stories and his bullshit stories. So I'm gonna fast forward to the pig roast and the drawing of the names. The day goes by fast. When night falls, people are animated and surround the bonfire. Stories flow to the sound of crackling wood and night birds. The hills are one with a dark sky, but I can guess where they are and where the fog will be tomorrow. I impale the meat on my buck knife and join Dongsin and Patrick by the fire. This is the solemn time when Dan draws from a hat. I've shown Dongsin the Cadillac, even if she doesn't have a driver's license either. If she wins, she can sell it and pay 6 months worth of rent. If I win, I won't have to worry about saving money to fly home. I have 3 chances. She has 1, because we had bought tickets. When Dan brings the stack of papers I folded the day before, I try not to cringe again. They're fewer than I remember stacking, and I have good visual memory. I almost feel as if I remember how I folded each paper, and I imagine the names written inside. I know now. He was never going to include the real names, the ones of the people I had talked into buying raffle tickets. My horse-loving professor and my Maryland friend, these two who are smiling broadly next to me, waiting to win an American car. I bend my head. I know what's coming. The 30-odd people look at him with benevolent eyes, and I can see that they know too. They smile. They don't want him to lose the farm. He draws from his gray hat. Michael Warner, he announces. People look around as if expecting a Michael Warner to come and claim the Cadillac. Dan waits while I stare at the fire. He didn't show up, what do you know, says Dan. I'll have to call him tomorrow. Bankruptcy takes one small step back. The pig roast goes on. And that was the last story that I wanted to read from. So I can close this. Okay, so we have a little time for questions. If there are any questions?
Did you come up with the title of the book?
The title of the book, I think it's one of the other, some of the stories I told you are very symbolic. So this title comes from a story called Whirl of Birds. And that story was written based on an experience I had. I had just moved to Texas, and I wasn't used to the birds here. And there are these kind of vultures, or I think buzzards, vultures. Maybe somebody knows exactly what they are.
Vultures?
The what?
The turkey vultures?
Turkey vultures.
Yeah, the ones that come small.
And they come in like sometimes hundreds, and I've seen them since then. But first they fly to this place in the sky, and then they start going in circles like that, and they create a big, like a tornado of birds, and then they dissipate. They go in their own direction, like they leave. I don't know why they have this gathering and then they go away. But in my story, what I added to that image that was striking to me was another dream I had about confronting an old woman in the shower, and I had to fight her physically. She wanted to kill me. A little shining, I guess, in the dream. So in the dream, the character skips from one age to the next, So she crashes her car as she's looking at these birds. And then suddenly her life starts fast forwarding to the point where she has this moment where she finds this old woman in the upstairs bathroom, and she throws that woman off the balcony. Then she realizes the one who fell was her younger self, and she's the old woman at the balcony. So it's kind of a comment on the passing of time. And then there's a bird that comes and sits next to her on the balcony at the end of the story. She's alive at the end, but she has realized how quickly time passes and how these birds are kind of eternal. Of course, the birds are always different, but they're at the same time the same birds. And we change, they remain the same. So yeah, I thought that story had more kind of a meaning that maybe kind of encompasses everything else in the book. So that's why I made it the title story. I gave the book the title of that story. Long story short, but yeah, then I had this painter friend who I asked permission to let me use one of his works, because I thought it's kind of a fitting image with birds. So yeah, I didn't paint that. Sorry, not me. Other questions?
What would you say are some of the challenges and advantages and just general differences in approach to writing short stories versus novels or just longer stories?
There's some advantage. Short stories you can get the point across much faster. And if you write poetry, you can do it even faster. So it's how much you want to concentrate your point. Of course, the novel allows you to completely unpack every character. I mean, depends what type of novel it is. But for example, the novel that I've been writing, I left it aside and I started writing more short stories because I kind of I had a lot of ideas and I didn't want to cram them all in one novel. So I said, okay, I'm gonna leave these for different short stories and just make different like snippets of points or meaning through the short stories. But each of these short stories, at some point I thought maybe it could be a novel, or some of them, not all of them, okay. But the one I read last, Dan, I still in my mind, I should write a novel about Dan, but mostly making up his previous life before I met him. Although I don't know, his living relatives may hate me if I make up horrible things about him. But there was some duality to this person. In the meantime, he died, I'm sorry, but he had a brain tumor. But in any case, what was intriguing to me was how he was very Christian. He only talked about positive things, but I could tell that he had a past, very troubled past. And I could only see the person that I saw, so I met a kind person, but his daughter refused to let him meet her daughter. So there was something strange in his past. And I can only make it up because I'm not gonna go to his daughter and say, hey, tell me give me all the dirt on your dad. I didn't keep in touch with them. But just to come back to this idea of short story versus novel, I'm gonna mention James Joyce, who wrote both novels and short stories. And what I like more from James Joyce are the short stories. Somehow he manages in the short stories to concentrate the point and just make a kind of a gem, put out a gem. And he actually came up with this, the literary version of the term epiphany, which is kind of a religious term, but he used that in literature. And he at the end of each of his stories, his characters have an epiphany, meaning they have a realization. So that's how he saw short stories. You have to have a glimpse at the truth through, what the characters experience in that one little story, because it's not a very long story, obviously, but he wanted people to be able to glimpse at the truth through one story. And for example, I mean, these revelations or epiphanies are not like earth-shattering. Sometimes it's like, okay, in Araby, for example, there's a character who's a boy who has his first crush, and it ends with the girl turning his back to him or whatever. So like, oh, okay, I guess that's how love is. You get hurt. So, I mean, not great revelation, but a truth about life, right? So each story to me, it's easy to think, okay, I'm going to concentrate this meaning in one glimpse, which to me stories are, but novels are different. You can have many different revelations through the whole novel, and you can follow character in more like through time and through the changes in the character to a bigger revelation maybe. But it depends on preference, right? And also novels are easier to turn into movies. So a short story, then you make people work to add more detail if you. There have been movies made based on short stories, but it's easier if you have a novel, you have more detail. You had a question here.
Did you ever go back and see Dan again, like after you had left that month?
Yeah, for about a year, I'd go like not every weekend, but whenever I could, I'd go and help at the stable. And then he had also, there was a lady who was his girlfriend for a while, and I kept in touch with her actually. And she told me when something happened to him and he had to go in the hospital, and both of us were visiting him till the very end. He was at a veterans hospital. So yeah, I mean, I did see him after that, but sadly not for too long. But I haven't ridden horses much since then. But anyway, I just discovered a horseback riding business here in McAllen. So I'm like, yeah, okay. So I'm happy to reconnect to the horse aspect. Other questions?
How did you decide on the order of the stories?
I didn't want to do it chronologically, like, okay, this is my oldest story, this is my newest story. No, I didn't do it like that. So I started with what I thought would have an impact to kind of, I teach English, so, you have a thesis that has a hook. So my first story is a hook. Because I think it's a little more unique, because it's a story about a Neanderthal girl. So yeah, it's a subject that hasn't been talked about much. So I thought maybe this is a more unique story to start with. And then I try to vary to go like one more maybe darker and then one that is more uplifting. So I vary the emotions. So it's not all like you don't have story after story that, oh my God, everybody dies. No, I'm like, what's wrong with her? So yeah, I try to vary the emotions and kind of modulate that. And I ended with the story that is the most realistic, because somehow I felt that that's closer to me, to my heart, because it's real experience. So yeah, I had kind of I let my mind kind of flow from one to the next. Okay, what would fit well at the end of this? What would wake people up or get them to be less depressed by this story? Let me give a more uplifting one. And so they follow their own logic, I guess.
You mentioned the birds and the vultures, right, as a visual inspiration. And then you also mentioned this Dan as a catalyst, right? So what do you think is the connection between those two things? Between Dan and the birds?
Well, it's a very interesting question, because I haven't thought about it specifically, but Dan to me, I was at that moment, I was a student, I was young, full of ideas what my future will be, and he was toward the end of his life, and it turned out that he actually didn't live that much longer after that experience I had. So the story with the birds to me represent time, and the encounter with Dan was also kind of a mirror of time, like young versus old. But a lot of experiences can connect these two ages, in the end, we found a lot of things in common. We both like nature, we both like horses. But yeah, I mean, the birds, the vultures also are a reminder because the type of birds that they are, that we associate them with corpses, maybe because they eat roadkill and stuff like that. So it's a reminder, but it's contains life and death at the same time. So there's a connection, I guess, to the damn story because yeah, we all grow old eventually. Other questions? Okay, I don't know what time it is, but
Just a little bit past 3:00.
I'm sorry if I kept it too long. I am very happy to see all of you here and thank you for.
Here, Miss Andreasen's an instructor here. I don't know if you missed that.